You are live.
Thank you. Welcome. This is the afternoon session of the House Appropriations Committee. It's just after 1 o'clock on Tuesday, February 24th, 2023. And we have with us the Adjutant General, and then we will have a break, and then we'll have our public hearing at 3. So that's what our afternoon looks like. And gentlemen, I'm not sure that you have met all of us in person yet, so perhaps we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves and then let you start. So I'm Robin Shy, and I am from Middlebury.
Pat Brennan, I'm from Colchester.
Tip Lilly from Burlington.
Tristan Tolino from Brattleboro.
Harry Dolan from Waitsfield, and I represent Duxbury, Facein, Warrentown, Waitsfield, and Warren.
Where my son lives.
Yes.
Lynn Dickinson, I represent St. Albans Town.
Annie?
Mark Mahaly, I represent Callis, Plainfield, Marshfield.
Trevor Squirrel, Underhill and Jericho.
Yes, sir.
Page from Newport.
Rebecca Holcomb, I represent Norwich, Sharon, Stratford, and Thetford.
Outstanding. Good to see you.
Nice to see you again.
Good afternoon, General Jim Harrison, Chittenden, Bendon, Killington, and Pittsfield.
Good to see you, sir.
And our
Greg Knight, Vermont's Adjutant General.
nice to meet you. And our chair, Representative Lamper, is working on the public hearing, so she'll join us again in a little bit. And Representative Page is your liaison, I believe. So we'll pass that. And then we all have gotten a handout from you.
Yes, ma'am.
So we'll ask you to take it away.
Thank you, ma'am. What I'd like to do, I'll start with kind of a wave tops. There's a lot of words here. I will go as quickly as I can. Before I do get started, I would like to recognize the work of Ken Gregg, my Deputy Adjutant General, and Ms. Kim Fideli. Kim actually did all the work in putting this together. Really makes my job easy. So I thought it would be important to recognize both of them in a public forum because of the work that they do. Really makes it low maintenance for me. So we've been very busy over the past couple of years, and last year was no exception. But I wanted to share the many accomplishments, and of course, you will be seeing this month my semi-annual, every 6 months, I send out my legislative update to everybody. Our fighter wing exited conversion from the F-16s on schedule at the end of 2021, actually December 31st. And then their first year was 2022 as a fully operational F-35 fighter squadron. It was about 90 days after that conversion was complete, I got a phone call from the Director of the Air National Guard asking if they were ready for deployment in support of NATO. And of course, the answer was the same as it always is. They are ready. And within 30 days, our fighter wing deployed to European Command in support of the NATO air policing mission. We deployed 8 aircraft flown by the Vermont Air Guard, the fighter squadron within the 158th Fighter Wing, and more than 200 airmen to Spangdahlem Air Base in Germany. Over the course of that deployment, they flew more than 450 sorties, totaling more than 2,000 flying hours. And they were joined on those missions by other aircraft from NATO countries, and they in essence did a round robin through all of our NATO partnered nations, the Baltic states, and even into our partner state of North Macedonia for a quick stopover. What you don't see in here is the degree of efficiency and professionalism that this fighter wing brought to that mission. There's been a narrative out there from some folks, not the Guard, that the Air Guard is not accessible, nor is it cost effective. We obviously beg to differ. The accessibility, that question was certainly answered by what they did here. And they did it with 4 fewer C-17s, which are our cargo aircraft, with Air Mobility Command, and 100 fewer airmen than a like unit on active duty. So within that professionalism, 81% of the 400 aircraft maintainers that we have completed their advanced F-35 qualification training. And we have 33 pilots that are fully F-35 qualified. 16 are instructor pilots. That's the highest percentage of any F-35 operational squadron in the Air Force. Kelsey Flannery is our first female F-35 pilot, now a first lieutenant. She arrived with us in September of 2022. She is also has the distinction of being the first female pilot to fly the F-35 in the Air National Guard. And most recently, this past October, she was joined by Lieutenant Colonel Kristen Hubbard, who I met in person a couple of months ago down in DC. She came to us off active duty. She's an F-16 instructor pilot, She is a former Thunderbird pilot and now an F-35 pilot with deployment experience. So we're hitting opposite ends of the spectrum there. They're going to be an example for us moving forward as we continue to grow opportunities for everybody. The fighter wing constantly receives awards and accolades from across the Air Force and Air National Guard. Received the Meritorious Unit Award for participation in retrograde operations from Afghanistan, Operation Allies Refuge, and Operation Allies Welcome. Our Civil Engineer Squadron, those were the civil engineers that built the alternate care facility during the COVID pandemic twice. They designed it and we worked collaboratively as a joint venture to build it. They received the Outstanding Civil Engineer Unit Award, the Colonel William Denneke Air National Guard Outstanding Civil Engineer Unit Award, and the Senior Master Sergeant Gerald Stryzak Award. One is for the top Air National Guard Civil Engineer Unit, based upon installation and expeditionary engineering, emergency services, environmental leadership, and community support. The Stryzak Award is for the Air Force Civil Engineer Explosive Ordnance Disposal Flight. So we have the best explosive ordnance disposal flight in the Air Force. And our Wing Public Affairs team, they received the Air Force Director's Excellence Award for the innovation in outstanding photo and video products, supporting the F-35 round robin through the NATO nations during the European Command deployment. Currently, we have 16 members of our Air National Guard deployed, 13 to Central Command, and 3 others deployed in support of Cyber Command. And our Air National Guard Fire Department remains the primary fire and emergency response unit at Burlington International Airport. They routinely provide fire and emergency response support not only to the airfield, but also to the surrounding communities at no cost, receiving more than 244 responses this year, both on and off base. On the Army Guard, more success. We've hired 14 new recruiters, which habitually have been very difficult to fill. It's a very challenging position. So now we are growing our field production force to 28 recruiters. We partnered with a number of agencies within Vermont, but also businesses. We've a couple of initiatives. One is the Program for Youth Success, where we would align somebody who graduates from basic and advanced individual training. We will guarantee them up to 5 interviews with participating employers. We've also got an initiative, homegrown initiative, we call the Partnered Recruiting Initiative for Military and Employers. Since we have to have an acronym, we call it PRIME. And just last week, I signed that agreement with Blodgett in Essex, and we're looking to grow that even further. One thing I'd like to point out here to the committee, our Recruiting and Retention Battalion assessed 8 new Americans into the Vermont Army National Guard, which assists with their expedited citizenship packets. So there's challenges in recruiting, and the propensity to serve oftentimes isn't where we'd like it to be. But I do know where it is. It's when those communities, those underrepresented populations that come here and can take advantage of the opportunities afforded by being in the Guard. If they are a lawful permanent resident here, we can facilitate them joining the Guard, which in the end can, and in most instances does, streamline and shortens the timeline for becoming a U.S. citizen. So we've made overtures, met with Ali Jang and Sandrine Kebwe a couple of months ago with the Vermont New American Advisory Council, and we're coming at it from 2 directions. The recruiters will continue to build the relationships at the citizen level, the person that we want to educate on our opportunities. And I will come at it strategically because my intent is to build something that transcends my time in this job. Military Fuel Honors. In February of last year, we hosted a 2-week course. I feel very strongly about the Military Fuel Honors program. My directive to the folks participating in this who render honors, both Air and Army, we have one chance to get it right. So as a result of that, we had over a dozen soldiers meeting the stringent standards and graduating with a level 2 certification. And they conducted over 400 separate honors events, not only across Vermont, but we also supported sections of northern New York. Last year, you're probably aware, we had about 1,000 of our Army National Guard soldiers back from 3 separate mobilizations to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. They did the majority of their work with security and stability operations across 7 countries for about a year-long deployment. All of our units performed remarkably well, and some were recognized with the Meritorious Unit Citation for their work during the evacuations in Afghanistan. And I'll come back to that one in just a minute if I could, Madam Chair. The 86th Brigade deployed over 100 soldiers in May, this past May of 22, for a 3-week training exercise, which we call Swift Response 2022. That's a NATO-level training exercise. It was conducted with our state partner, North Macedonia. Next year, we'll be celebrating 30 years of partnership with them. That was the largest ever military exercise in their country. That was conducted at Krivolak Training Area, but it involved 2,500 soldiers from multiple countries, the US, the UK, North Macedonia, Italy, Montenegro, and France. And it was aimed at increasing security in the region, cooperation between our partners, and focusing on the interoperability because North Macedonia is our newest NATO ally. We also spent a lot of time in 2022 preparing 3 of our aviation units for federal mobilization. So we have our medical evacuation unit. They just deployed earlier this month, actually, to Central Command. They're currently at Fort Hood, kind of doing their round-out training. And that's about 65 of our soldiers, and 8 of our helicopters will be going into Central Command. And then we've got a pending mobilization. This will be at a domestic mobilization. They'll stay inside the United States, probably working out of Fort Meade, Maryland on the cyber mission. That's what our critical infrastructure team. And then we looked at our sustainment folks. There's a premier training area at Camp Dodge, Iowa. We maintain relationships within the 54 states, territories, and DC. That is a premier logistics training center for our support personnel. And we sent over 100 soldiers there to train on maintenance operations, medical operations, and then distribution. And it really improved their capabilities and capacity and grew their experience level here when they're called in Vermont. Our Army Band completed 32 different missions. That's concerts, parades, ceremonies, and funerals, a lot of community relations events for us. And their audience count last year was 24,000 people going to their concerts. Just yesterday, I was up at the Mountain Warfare School. We are hosting the 55th International Association of Military Mountaineering Schools Conference. There are 13 nations represented there. I encourage them to spend money in Vermont and help our economy. But the band played at least the opening stanza of all 13 national anthems. So they're pretty impressive. Our civil support team, if you're not familiar with them, I think we'll get on the calendar schedule. I know the legislative session is quite busy. Love for you to come see our civil support team and the capabilities. They are full-time. There are, I believe, 56 some states. The large states have 2 teams. They are our chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and electronic hazard response force. And they've conducted 44 real-world support missions, and that puts them in the top 20% of teams nationally in the operational tempo for a unit of that size. They've done training with the FBI. Recently, they received one of the highest external evaluation scores ever given to a civil support team by Army North. And then they're fully integrated in our state partnership program. Either we bring the state partners to Vermont to integrate with that civil support team, or in this case, we've sent them to Senegal and North Macedonia working with the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. So it kind of shows that for a small state, we have a pretty significant reach, and we're able to do that efficiently and effectively. And then within the joint, this is of importance to me. If you're not familiar with how we're built, you have different staff sections. Representative Page will be very familiar with it, but if you're Army, it's a G1 is personnel, G2 is intelligence, G3 is operations. Put an A in front of it, it becomes air. If you put a J in front of it, it's both air and Army. So I'm standing up a J9, which takes all of those elements that reside either under the Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel or the Human Resources Office and need more of a, either by regulation or law, a habitual link to the Adjutant General. That includes the State Equal Employment Manager, Sexual Assault Response Coordinator, Victim Advocates, and most recently, we're standing them up. I think we finished the hiring process. I'm on the General Officer Steering Committee at the national level, working with 4 other Adjutants General on completely revising the National Guard approach to sexual harassment, sexual assault, and then the other task force is working on suicide prevention. As a result of the work with those task forces, Vermont's in the first group to hire a violence prevention workforce. So we have 5 full-time members. These are Title V civilian full-time members of our Guard. And what this does is it brings capability to the Guard, specifically to Vermont, that we've never had before. And it's focusing on prevention. And that takes a lot of the pressure and stress off of the sexual assault response coordinator, who was doing dual duty of training and response. It wasn't fair to that team, and it wasn't fair to the organization. So we've gotten that on the right track. September 11th, we did our open house. We've done small scale ones. This one, I don't think we've ever done one to this scale. I think it was unprecedented. We had more than 6,000 military and civilian guests come on base. We'll do it again, not soon. That was incredible. We had folks coming from other states. The ferry from New York was completely backed up. So good problem to have. We'll fix the parking for next time. Something else to focus on, again, we have so many well-kept secrets in our Guard. There's a state counter-drug team. So we have personnel embedded in various law enforcement agencies and the Department of Public Safety, and they provide analytical support. We also have Rotary Wing support for a total of 9 missions, some observation, training to law enforcement. We do search and rescue. I'll have to go back. If you're interested, I can find I think it was 2 years ago, one of our analysts actually solved a cold case murder by applying their analytics and getting that resolved and helping out that family to have closure. If you're familiar with the state partnership program, last year, we'll be celebrating 1 year actually this May. We were selected for partnership with the Republic of Austria. That's our 3rd partnership. As noted, we've been with North Macedonia for 30 years, Senegal for 15 years next year, and then Austria 1 year in May. And at some point, I will bring them down here and show them around the State House as our 4 Olympic biathletes. So Specialist Sean Doherty, Specialist Leif Nordgren, who has now gone on to become a warrant officer, and he's flying Black Hawk helicopters for us. Sergeant Deidre Irwin, Specialist Vaclav Cervenka, all went to the Olympics, the Winter Olympics in Beijing. What's of note here, Sergeant Irwin placed 7th overall in the women's 15K biathlon individual race. That is the best individual result for a U.S. biathlete in Olympic history. And she's in the Guard. We've closed out our COVID-19 missions. You can read the details there. I want to leave time for Kim to come up and talk specifics, and if you have any questions. Number of responses to the capital region, and most recently, in our cold snap here, we opened 5 armories for use. What I wanted to point out to you, ma'am, was Task Force Avalanche. That was our folks who were deployed to Central Command. They worked at multiple locations in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates. And they got the call to support the withdrawal from Kabul airport in Afghanistan. The image that you see here, if you look at that picture, you'll see on the left sleeve that unit insignia. That is the 86th Infantry Brigade Mountain Team. Those are our soldiers. And they're on the last C-17 out. We sent 46 brigade soldiers to support that airlift. Pretty powerful story to tell. Many of those soldiers will receive either the Humanitarian Service Medal or a meritorious unit citation. And there's a link there should you have a chance to go look for it. The last flight out of Afghanistan. So a lot of goodness in our Guard. Certainly a lot of work left to be done. In my view, we remain a value proposition. I've got amazing folks managing the budget, which is probably a good thing. But when it comes to budgets, we're cost effective. We're very good stewards of the money that we're given. And that's what I have for today, Madam Chair. Any questions from the committee? And I will turn it over to Ms. Kim Fideli if you wanted to go through some of the specifics.
Probably would look forward to the budget. Were there any other questions on the general? Okay.
I apologize for my delay.
No worries, ma'am.
Sometimes I get stuck in the hall and I should never go out there.
I'm going to keep you tied to the chair.
Otherwise, but I find out good things.
Outstanding. Yep.
You're welcome to stay up here.
You're welcome to
You
stay
don't have
there.
to
You don't
leave.
have to
There's
leave.
3 chairs, so if you.
Okay.
Maybe you might want to leave. You don't have to.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Kim Fidelli. I'm the financial manager for the military department. I'll pick up right where General Knight left off on page 6. So just to give a brief overview of what the military department does, we're here to support the Air and Army National Guard. There are a number of programs we have that are federally funded. Our state budget is about $6 million. The federal funds that go along with that, almost 60 million. So just to give a brief overview of some of those programs, during an emergency where state active duty might come into play, the state active duty pay and operations run through the military department through the administration budget. We experienced that quite a lot in the last few years. We also provide security for all the Vermont Air and Army National Guard facilities, including Camp Johnson, the Ethan Allen Training Site in Jericho, the Army Aviation Support Facility, and the Vermont Air National Guard Fighter Wing. We also provide support to Vermont veterans through the Office of Veterans Affairs just across the street. There's a STEM program available through the Air National Guard. It's called Starbase. It's where middle schoolers can come to the air base and learn about everything STEM related, shoot rockets, all very fun things that I would like to do myself, but I cannot. And a number of other programs that I can touch on a little bit as we go through the appropriations. Some of the programs that we report on for performance measures include energy management. It's a very important aspect within the Army National Guard program, keeping track of the cost of operating these facilities, how much energy we're using, how we're able to maximize the federal dollars to upgrade these facilities so that they can be more energy efficient. There's some more detail on that page regarding the change over time. Our square footage is increasing. We're doing our best to keep actual usage and cost as level as possible. And we've been accomplishing that for the most part by upgrading these facilities and maintaining efficiencies. One of our other programs that we report on is in the Office of Veterans Affairs. We have currently 4 veteran service officer positions that assist Vermont veterans with obtaining federal benefits, including disability and health benefits. Those 4 veteran service officers can bring in anywhere between $4 million and I think last year they did $7.9 million in federal benefits. And that's just with the 4 positions that we currently have. We'll get into this a little bit later on, but we are requesting funding for 2 additional veteran service officer positions during this year to maintain the support that is already being provided, in addition to assisting those veterans that are requesting benefits through the PACT Act. Our last program that we report on is the Joint Enlistment Enhancement Program. That's a recruiting incentive program that runs through our administration budget. Essentially, a Vermont National Guard member or a Vermont National Guard employee can refer a person to the Vermont National Guard recruiters. If that person enlists in the Vermont National Guard, they will receive an incentive payment of $500 to $1,000. So far, this program was piloted in mid-fiscal year 21. And since that date, we have recorded 76 enlistments through this program.
Give a little background on that one.
Sure.
So Two areas, if I go back very quickly, Madam Chair, on the request of the two additional Veteran Services officers, it's important to note here, their success rate in working with veterans and bringing in bulk rehab, education benefits, medical benefits, compensation and pension, that generates a return, as noted here, $22 of federal benefits for every dollar of state funding paying for their salary. That's pretty significant. And as Kim noted now, with the PACT Act becoming law and our efforts to work with local media and the governor putting out public service announcements to ensure veterans are participating and register, not only for the burn pit registry, but for qualifying locations within the PACT Act and get a screening, we anticipate significant increase in the demand on those veteran services officers. The Joint Enlistment Enhancement Program, again, I come back to recruiting as a service-wide challenge. We are no exception with a very small demographic here. We are seeing some dividends by incentivizing it, ask people to step outside of their lane perhaps and do some recruiting. And we're going to continue doing that. Now that we have our Army National Guard back from deployment, we're going to keep messaging this and making sure that the word gets out that, yes, we need your help and it's money well spent. I borrowed this idea from, hate to admit it, but Alabama.
They're probably not the only ones. We do have a
Just
question.
say that like it's a.
We have a question from Representative.
Don't tell the chief.
Representative Shaw is gonna keep driving.
Just to clear, the two VSO positions did not get in the governor's language, is that correct? So this is.
They are in the governor's recommended budget. They're actually existing positions, so we've reallocated from other areas of the department
Okay.
that were vacant, so those
There's
positions.
no language needed because they're existing positions that are
Correct.
just being redone. Okay. Thank you.
That's my question, Representative Mahaly.
My ignorance about your program would fill more than this, so I have a very basic question. How many people do you have total? How many people are in the National Guard? Whatever their job, whatever they're doing, how many FTEs are we talking about?
So I should have, in the Army National Guard, I should have 2,600. I do not. I have about 2,100 right now. On the Air National Guard side, I'm short probably 75. I should have 1,100. Very close to 1,100. I've got a little north of 1,000. So I could fill right now 500 vacancies. And that would get us where we needed to be. Those are opportunities for Vermonters. Increases our capability, our capacity. Remains one of my frustrations is getting the word out and educating folks about opportunities.
Right, and you sent 8 F-35s over. How many F-35s have you got?
We have 20.
You have 20, okay. And other aircraft?
Just the F-35 and the fighter wing.
Right, okay. Thank you. That's it.
Okay.
Great, please keep track.
All right, so on to page 10. As I mentioned, previously, the majority of our operating budget is federal funded. In 2022, total military department expenditures were $52 million. 45 million of those were federal dollars. 5 million were general fund. There was also a mix of special fund and capital construction. And just a little bit of the ending of our COVID response efforts. On military operations alone, we spent $49 million, 45 million of that federally reimbursable, which leaves the state with only $3.5 million of the cost, or about 7%. So for every dollar of general fund that we are spending, we're receiving over $13 in federal funds. The department will continue to see a rise in federal funding over the next several years as we continue our military construction projects. There's several major military construction projects coming up. We're just completing the Army Mountain Warfare School project, which was $30 million. And many more to come in the next 5 years or so. For federal fiscal year 21, we received a single audit on our master cooperative agreements that we received all this federal funding through. There were no findings to report. There are several grants that flow through the military department. One of the biggest ones that we have is the Vermont National Guard Tuition Benefit Program that comes into our administration budget. Our total request this year is $1.32 million, which is level with our request from FY22. Just to note there, in FY22, this program, which is run through VSAC, VSAC executed just over $760,000 through the tuition benefit program. Some changes that we're seeing in the next couple of years, effective for this academic year. Some of the programs that are being offered through this program have expanded. Those students are now able to utilize this program for master's degrees, second bachelor's degrees, and certificate programs. Currently this year we have 4 students utilizing this program for a master's degree, 2 students for second bachelor's, and 4 students for certificate programs.
So if I may interrupt you here. The 1.32 is level funded from the previous year, and yet it sounds like last year you only used 760,000.
We did revert the remainder of that to the general fund.
Right, and so I know that's what happens, but then why would you need 1.32 million this year? Do you think you're going to actually use it this year?
It's hard to say at this point. We've seen a lot of fluctuations in the last few years, and it's a fairly new program. We're trying to keep that budget where our maximum that we could see, and we're happy to revert any unused funding as the year goes on. We've had several deployments in the last few years that have decreased our spending rate. There have also been fluctuations in the federal benefit as well. For instance, I think last year the Air Guard was given federal benefits prior to using this program. That was only effective for 1 year, and that federal benefit is no longer available. So we do anticipate that to increase the cost of this program in the future years.
If I could, that's the key. Ken Wright, Deputy Auditor General. One of the key highlights is we just returned 1,000 soldiers from deployment that weren't in the mix. So a third of the force wasn't available to use the school as a big factor.
So we'll see what happens this year.
Yeah, but also the whole federal tuition assistance not being available for the Air Guard, that's $4,500 per student for every student that uses the fund.
Thank you.
And maybe one thing I would like to point out here, it's the work with the legislature that made this a reality. In my view, and speaking with my colleagues in other states, this is perhaps the best educational entitlement in the National Guard. Not only is it applicable to state colleges, but it's also applicable to private institutions. Other states don't do that. They rely on the state college system.
So they can go to private institutions to do.
Yes, ma'am. And even if the education entitlement doesn't pay its entirety, obviously they have federal tuition assistance and the Montgomery GI Bill to help mitigate the cost.
Madam Chair, did you have a question?
Well, sort of. I remember because I worked on this one with Representative Fagan and at the time Representative Strong, because it was actually thought that it might end up costing out, depending on, almost $6 million. So it's coming in, which I'm not saying we should, but it's less than actually some of the predicted use was, but it is an important piece. I've got one that's coming up here. I was just wondering, and maybe I can ask it now, is the one-time dollars that's general fund that's on the governor's recommend, you've got them down here in the B 1100, the $10,000 for the USS Vermont support group, and the $10,000 for granting to the North Country honors flight, both really good things. I was just wondering, why they couldn't fit in your budget versus coming in at using one-time dollars for that.
Could I speak to that?
Come sit.
Probably be best. So the challenge with that was actually we didn't ask for the money.
Okay.
We, in several areas, particularly in some of the, we end up through our Veterans Affairs Office being a pass-through for several programs. For example, Boys and Girls State, the Boy Scouts Veterans Day Parade, the Military Family Community Network,
And
and
there's a medals piece, there's like.
the medals program
Medals.
as well. So the governor's staff was approached about the USS Vermont team. We helped have that conversation, and the governor is the one that actually made the decision on the one-time appropriation. In the honors flight, we weren't aware of it until we were putting together our budget in the final throes, and it was, again, the governor received a request for the honor flight for a one-time. There's going to be 10 Vermonters this year that are going to be participating in that program.
I know if Representative Helm was here, you know, about that, that's kind of an, but I was just wondering, so it's not something you asked for, so it was put in here for you to be as a pass-through.
In effect.
So we would need to talk with, do you know who we would talk with if we wanted to find out, you know, more about that?
As far as the honor flight?
Either one,
Either, yeah.
both.
Well, I think the USS Vermont, there is actually a standing committee available for that.
I think we didn't, we do a couple of years ago too, that wasn't,
Well, that was for the commissioner.
it was a sub, right?
Yes, ma'am, the USS Vermont. So what's happened is the USS Vermont has transitioned from a commissioning committee to a family, basically a family support committee. So there's a standing committee in Vermont that's supporting the submariners on the USS Vermont from a family support perspective. There's families, submariners, submariners, families that actually come to Vermont for activities. They're up here a couple of times a year, actually. And they're just looking for help to sustain the long-term support of that, of our namesake submarine.
Just want to keep an eye on the time. We have about 15 minutes because we have to get ready for the public hearing. So I'll ask you to.
Absolutely. Okay. I will talk to some more specifics of the budget now. Our general fund budget has overall increased just about 3% with two exceptions. In state fiscal year 23, effective this past July, the department is now being recognized as at the agency level as opposed to a large department. So there are a couple of salary and benefit increases that go along with that. So in our administration budget, we have an increase of about $50,000 for those positions. That is one of the larger increases to our admin budget.
So I have to ask you about that. Sorry, after saying we need to move on. Was that a decision of the governor to make it an agency level? And where did that come from? I don't remember that we talked about that last year in the budget, but I may have forgotten. I don't know.
These two positions here?
I don't remember.
Basically, I believe so, right? The governor's office opted to just change the size category. He did not give the department an agency designation per se, but for size-wise and because of the interoperability and the complexity of the department and its ability to support so many state agencies and its mission, he identified it as a agency equivalent.
Okay.
And so subsequently, the exempt employees got classed at a different.
So you got reclassified, your positions were reclassified.
That's correct.
as a result of that. Okay, thank you.
And so is that the increase of two exempt positions, that 50,000?
That's correct.
That is utilizing what you just stated, that's the two for,
Yes, that's correct. That's above and beyond what a 3% increase would have been for those positions, so.
oh, that's the difference?
Yes.
Okay,
That's right.
okay. difference? Because that seems really low, but okay.
One of the other major changes to our budget, as we've discussed previously, is the requested funding for the 2 new veteran service officer positions. That request is $170,000 for 2 full-time positions down here at the Office of Veterans Affairs.
There we go.
Overall, wages and benefits for the military department are just under $16 million. Of that $16 million, only 2.6% is general funds. The remainder of that is federally funded. And I can head right into the budget development form and go through some of the changes through each appropriation.
Yeah, better known as we call it the ups and downs of the crosswalk. Yeah.
So our administration budget, as we've discussed, includes the tuition benefit program for $1.3 million. There are 7 positions that are funded in the admin budget, including the adjutant general, deputy adjutant general, and the office that surrounds them. Also in this appropriation is the majority of all of our internal service funds, which are all the bills that we owe to other state departments, including HR support, ADS, vision, all of those bills. They're all considered overhead costs, and unfortunately, we're not able to capture those within our master cooperative agreements. Those are not reimbursable, so they live in our admin budget. That really is our biggest increase for this fiscal year is the change to our internal service funds, about $76,000, and that's unfortunately one that we do not have control over.
We've heard that from a few other.
Yes, I'm sure. Next up is our air service contracts. So any of our programs with the Air National Guard live in this appropriation. That includes a mixture of state and federal funds. The state funds that you see here are mainly for the state share of the facilities and operations program. So all of the utilities for the Vermont Air National Guard and the operations and maintenance that goes along with that, as well as funding for 18 positions that support that program. That program is funded between 75 and 80% federal funds, 20 to 25% state funds. Our federal budget has increased quite a bit in the last year. We have taken on a new federal program with the Air National Guard that is for sustainment, restoration, and modernization of Air National Guard facilities. That is 100% federally funded. And that program during this federal fiscal year 22 was just about $1 million. So that's that much more contracting and federal funds that flow through our department.
Nice.
In the next 2 appropriations kind of go hand in hand, the Army service contracts and the building maintenance. The Army appropriation is all of the federal funds that come through for our Army National Guard programs, including security, training support, environmental, facilities, and operations. The state match for those programs actually fall within the building maintenance budget that you see below, the $1.6 million. Similar to the Air National Guard, that is a mixture of state and federal funds. Depending on the facility, support can range from 50% to 75% to 100% federally funded, and the state makes up the difference for that. Operational costs within that program are increasing. Inflation is a big factor, as I'm sure you've heard from other departments as well. It also funds a portion of some of our small construction projects that aren't funded through capital constructions. There are some more stringent federal laws that are requiring American-made.
Buy American.
Build American, buy American.
American-made construction products that are certainly increasing the cost of these projects as well.
A question on what's in the capital bill, do you know, this year? Anything that's in the capital bill?
Yeah, we're going to them next, and
There you go.
our capital budget for 2 years is 2.3
2.3
million
million in the capital bill.
over the biennium. That's correct.
For 2 years.
Yeah,
Into a 2-year.
2-year budget.
Okay.
Okay. Lastly, we have our Veterans Affairs appropriation. There's a couple of different types of funds within this appropriation. We have general fund, some special fund for the Veterans Memorial Cemetery, and a little bit of federal funds for that funds one position down at the Office of Veterans Affairs. Something I would like to highlight in this appropriation, yes, we have our request for funding for the 2 veteran service officer positions. You will also see a decrease in other personal services, pay and benefits. We had several retirements this past year by long-term employees that were very high up in the steps for the military department. And with those retirements, we were able to find a major savings that helps to absorb some of the additional costs for the service officer positions. Okay.
Any questions?
Nope. Other than it was through testimony many, many years ago that I discovered the opportunities with some of the military, the veterans program that are now all scheduled in for Randolph Cemetery, Section D.
Could I make one clarification?
Yes.
When Kim was talking about the service officers and what they bring into the state, she was talking about the fact that the $7.9 million, to clarify for 2022, that's new benefits for that year. That's on top of the $250-ish million that are already flowing into the state of various veterans benefits. So that's annual new benefits.
Great. Sounds like you must have hit almost everybody at this point.
Well, no, we think with the PACT Act, and everybody's aware of what the PACT Act is, right? With the PACT Act, we're anticipating 6,500 to 7,500 new claims,
Okay.
and they're time sensitive within the year.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that's why we're feeling these additional service officers are critical, so we can provide these services and benefits.
Great. Any other questions?
Nope,
Nope, and our liaison is Representative Page, so we will funnel information back and forth through him. Thank you so much for
Yes.
coming in and for all your good work. Appreciate it.
I guess we can go off live, I guess.
We're on a break, and at 3 o'clock we will